Good evening, everybody. My name is Stephen Woolfolk. Thank you for being here tonight. I'm the Director of Programming and Marketing for the Kansas City Public Library, and I'm filling in tonight for my friend and colleague, Steve Weberg, whose introductions, as many of you know, have become kind of synonymous with the series we do with the Command and General Staff College. It seems like just about every time we do a program with the college, we talk about how many times that individual has presented in the 15-some year history of this partnership. And tonight, that number is 1 for Dr. Angela M. Riotto. This is the first, and it almost didn't happen. This program was scheduled a little later in the series, but that was before Dr. Riotto let us know that she was engaged, has since been married, and would be leaving the college. Fortunately, our good friend Chris Johnson, who organizes the series on the Command and General Staff College side, jumped into action, was able to help us move some stuff around and get this program in before she departs. Chris, thank you so much. We really didn't want anybody to miss out on this program. An assistant professor of military history at the college, Dr. Riotto specializes in the American Civil War, prisoners of war, memory studies, and gender studies. She previously worked as a historian on the Army's University Press films, making documentaries to teach military history and current U.S. Army doctrine. Her current research focuses on the ways in which both Union and Confederate soldiers remember their time as prisoners of war, their captivity. Tonight, though, she presents the latest installment in our Turning Point series, Vicksburg, Lessons Learned in the Pursuit of Victory. So please join me in welcoming for the first time to the Kansas City Public Library, Dr. Angela M. Riotto.
Well, hello, everybody. First off, thank you so much. I'll stay away from that other microphone until it's off, right? Is that better? Yes. Thank you so much for everyone being here. It is an absolute honor to be here tonight. I watch these videos oftentimes online, like I'm just cleaning the house, and I'm like, oh, I want to learn something today. So I can't believe I'm actually on this stage. I'm super excited to be here. Thank you to the Kansas City Public Library for continuing to host these programs. They are truly magnificent. And thank you to the Department of Military History, specifically Chris Johnson. I don't even know where he is. Chris, where are you? Being awesome? Somewhere? Oh, there he is. Hi. Thank you to him, right? Because he continuously keeps us in line, keeps us in check, invites us to be here. So thank you so much, Chris. We really appreciate it. And again, thank you to all of you for being here tonight. I know it's a beautiful day out, and you probably could have been somewhere else, but you chose to be here, so thank you so much. I'm really, really excited to be here. So tonight we're going to be talking about Vicksburg as a turning point. And when Chris first talked to us about turning points and turning point ideas, as a historian of the American Civil War, I immediately thought Vicksburg and, what's the other one? Gettysburg, right? Obviously, right? Or as my esteemed colleague, Dr. Harry Laver, said about 2 months ago, the wilderness. We won't give him a hard time about it, right? Or as we joked in the office, maybe just the arrival of Ulysses S. Grant to the war effort, right? That man is a turning point unto himself. But tonight we're going to talk about Vicksburg. And there's several reasons for this. One, Gettysburg, I think, is a turning point, especially in the eastern theater of the war. But I think Vicksburg has far more significance to the war, right? And far-reaching consequences for the war's geography, how the war is going to be fought going forward, and also who and what can be targeted going forward for the rest of the war. So that's what we're going to kind of talk about today. And really, I'm going to talk about 3 things specifically. One, we're going to talk about Vicksburg as the strategic military victory it was. We cannot talk about Vicksburg as a turning point if I don't talk about what everyone really knows, right? The capture of Vicksburg, securing and controlling the Mississippi River. We will talk about that, I promise. The second thing we're going to talk about, though, is kind of the operational planning and execution that allows for Vicksburg to be the real success and real turning point that it ends up being, and that is joint operations, right? The relationship and the collaboration between the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Army. And then third, we're going to talk about hard war, which is the purposeful targeting of Confederate private property, civilians, and any material supplies in support of the Confederacy to wear down the Confederacy. Right? That's what we're going to talk about. And then we're going to wrap up with kind of those lessons learned. What did they learn from the Vicksburg campaign? Did they learn anything? Right? And how did they apply that going forward? So why Vicksburg? Before we can really get into why Vicksburg is a turning point, we should probably talk about Vicksburg. Why is it important in the first place? So during the Civil War, Vicksburg and the Confederate garrison there is going to dominate and control the Mississippi River. As we can see here, we have a thing. This is about Vicksburg, and it sits along this hairpin turn in the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River has since shifted, but at the time of the Civil War, Vicksburg sat on bluffs about 300 feet above the Mississippi River. And I was just reading the other day, kind of freshening up about the Vicksburg campaign. And one historian, Mark M. Smith, tried to kind of explain what's going on here. And the way he tried to explain it was, picture a giant, what have you, kind of drawing the Mississippi River, right? Just slowly meandering, going back and forth, maybe a finger in the sand. And all of a sudden the person gets scared or shocked, and they go, and they jerk, right? And that's what we kind of see here with the Mississippi River. It makes a hairpin turn across the DeSoto Peninsula, and then Vicksburg is going to sit on top of it. And when that happened, it pushes up a ton of sediment, silt, and creating these 300-foot bluffs. And then it's as if the finger went tap and made a perfect plateau on top. And that's where they're going to put the city of Vicksburg. And from there, I cannot stress enough, the Confederates have command of the river. And it's going to take a lot of work between the U.S. Army and the U.S. Navy to finally subdue and capture Vicksburg. So why is Vicksburg important? Why are we talking about it? All right, they're there. Why didn't the Union just go around? Why is it such a big deal? Well, from Vicksburg, the Confederates have access to supplies from the Trans-Mississippi Theater. And this is going to include, say, eastern Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas. They can ship supplies across the Mississippi River into Vicksburg. In Vicksburg, there's a rail line, and from there, that's going to connect to Jackson and Meridian. And as you can probably see here, these are hubs. From there, all those supplies, all those materials from across the Mississippi River can be shipped all over the Confederacy. So, all right, that makes it important to the Confederacy. Why is it important to the Union? The Anaconda Plan. You guys have probably seen this image before, right? Lieutenant General Winfield Scott at the start of the war is going to draft a plan for subduing and defeating the Confederacy. This is going to include a blockade from the east and south of the Confederate States in rebellion, along the Mississippi River, going to control the Mississippi, and then the United States is able to attack the Confederacy from all sides. Key part of that is controlling the Mississippi River. And Abraham Lincoln is going to recognize this pretty early on, and he's going to say Vicksburg is the key to Union victory in the West, and maybe even for the entire war effort. One of the great quotes he says, "See what a lot of land these fellows hold, of which Vicksburg is the key. Let us get Vicksburg, and all that country is ours. The war can never be brought to a close until that key is in our pocket." So both the Confederacy and the Union recognize that Vicksburg is of strategic importance to the war effort. Right? This cannot be something that they can just go around, right? They have to take Vicksburg. The Union has to take Vicksburg if they're going to be successful. So, Ulysses S. Grant, like I said, turning point unto himself, right? I know a couple years ago and even a couple months ago, Dr. Laver talked about Ulysses S. Grant, his leadership, right? If you haven't seen those, I highly recommend going on YouTube and rewatching the reruns. Maybe that time he'll forgive me for calling him out for making the wilderness a turning point. Gonna give him a hard time, right? But let's talk about it. So Major General Grant is going to realize that they have to take Vicksburg. And what he's going to learn and adapt to is that if Vicksburg is the key to victory in the West, then Jackson, the capital of Mississippi, is going to be the key to Vicksburg. But it's going to take several months and several failed attempts before he's actually going to approach Jackson and go to Vicksburg from the east. So between November of 1862 and March of 1863, Grant and his Army of the Tennessee is going to try 6 times, 6 separate attempts to take Vicksburg via conventional means, right? All of these, all 6, fail. As you can see from this map, I will reference this a few times just so you understand where we are. So we're going to have the Grant's Mississippi Central advance, which is along the Mississippi Central Railroad, easy name, right? We're going to come back to that because we're going to talk about the raid at Holly Springs and how that's going to have influence on why Grant decides to kind of maybe turn to hard war and cut his supply lines. We are going to have the Chickasaw Bayou, Steel Bayou, Lake Providence, Grant's Canal, Yazoo Pass expedition, so many attempts at trying to subdue Vicksburg from more traditional means and via land. The Navy itself, even when we're going to talk about joint operations, is going to try many, many times to subdue Vicksburg from the river. All are going to fail. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about what actually happened. Why is this the more traditional military strategic victory that it is? So after all these failed, Grant is going to realize he's going to have to shift strategy. He's tried from the north. He's tried from the northwest. He's tried through central Mississippi from the north. What can you do? He's even tried Grant's Canal. All failed. So he's going to say, okay, Joint Operation South with Rear Admiral David Dixon Porter. He's going to march on the outside of Louisiana. He's going to come up through Bruinsburg, march overland to Jackson. If I could find out where Jackson is on here because I'm lost already. Jackson, thank you. And then he's going to turn and get Vicksburg, right? There's going to be multiple battles up to that point. There's going to be 2 bloody assaults in May against Vicksburg, also failed. And he's going to get down into a 47-long-day siege until Vicksburg finally surrenders on the 4th of July, 1863. That's the turning point. Right? They surrendered. Now the Union has complete control of the Mississippi River. Check. And that's the turning point which everyone knows. It also coincidentally aligns with the victory at Gettysburg, also in July of 1863. Like the universe planned that for historians. We're like, oh, we got that. July of 1863, done. But I would argue there's much more to Vicksburg as a turning point than that traditional story. What else is going on? They had 6 failed attempts. What did now Grant do differently that allowed him to be successful by May, June, and July 1863? Did they learn anything? What did they change? If there were lessons to be learned, did they actually learn them? Did they apply them later? Because I'm sure all of you know people who learn the same lessons over and over and over again, but they don't do anything about it. Same, right? So did they actually learn something? Did they implement it going future in the war? Is this really a turning point? And I'm going to say yes. So the big one I want to talk about first is joint operations, like I mentioned. This is Rear Admiral David Dixon Porter. You probably usually see the close-up image of him with the fantastic beard turned to the side, right? But this is fantastic. right? He has kind of the Captain Morgan stance going. I could not resist putting this up on this screen. And then we also have the USS Cincinnati ironclad, which is going to be sunk as part of the Vicksburg campaign in late May of 1863. So let's talk about joint operations. Joint operations are not new. They're not new to the Civil War. They're not new in history, right? They're not even new to the Western theater at this point. So what makes the Vicksburg campaign special? And what makes it special, and what I'm going to focus on specifically, is Grant's relationship with David Dixon Porter. Right? Their relationship, their understanding together, and their consistent, reliable, and effective collaboration for the Vicksburg campaign. So let me go back in time a little bit. And we're going to talk about the Yazoo expedition. Because again, like I said, this is not the very first time this has happened. By the time we're going to talk about the Joint Operations South, the crossing at Bruinsburg, they have been working together for a couple months. But really, it starts a little bit earlier. I would argue even before this, but especially in February of 1863. So going back to this, the Yazoo expedition up here. This is where Grant and Porter really start working together closely and developing that understanding. And some historians who look at the relationship between Porter and Grant are kind of surprised because they're very different people when it comes to their personalities. But they both realize they have to defeat the Confederacy, and they have to work together to do it. And so when they see opportunities, they kind of borrow from each other. They work together well. When someone has an idea, they're like, okay, yes, but what else can we do? And that's what we see with the Yazoo expedition. After all these failed attempts by Grant and the U.S. Army, and all the failed attempts by Porter and Farragut from the river, they realize they're going to have to work together if they're truly going to be successful. If they're going to take Vicksburg down, they're going to have to work together, and that's what we see. So Porter actually, some historians argue that Porter came up with the idea. He saw this opportunity to use his riverboat, the Mississippi River Squadron, in a unique way. And one way to do that is to sail up the Mississippi River. They're going to flood an old Yazoo Pass, and then they're going to sail south towards Vicksburg and kind of circle Vicksburg's batteries, right, with Sherman's troops. So an entire corps, they're going to do this. And this is in February of 1863. And I'm going to read for a little bit just to explain how complicated this expedition is and how it relies so much on joint operations and that joint understanding. So the expedition begins on 3 February 1863 with the breaching of the levee on the Mississippi River, allowing water to flow from the river into the former channel that connected the Yazoo River through other waterways. The attacking fleet passed through into Moon Lake, through the Yazoo Pass, to Coldwater River, and then into the Tallahatchie River, and then continues into the Yallabusha, and then eventually into the Yazoo River. So this is pretty complicated. And eventually this is going to meet into the Mississippi River again right above Vicksburg. Right? So they can't get across land effectively by themselves. They can't get to it by the river really by themselves. So maybe if they work together, they can do it. It's daring, it's ambitious, but maybe it might work. But from the start, the expedition's delayed. There's just natural obstacles in the ways, there's trees down. They're only making about 10 miles a day. This is very, very slow going. Because the progress is so slow, Confederate forces under Lieutenant General John C. Pemberton, who's in command of the Department of the Mississippi in East Louisiana in Vicksburg, is going to be able to send reinforcements to a kind of a makeshift fort to block their path. It's around Green Road, Mississippi. It's going to be called Fort Pemberton. Right? At least John C. Pemberton got something named after him. And by the time they get there on March 11th, so 6 weeks later, the Confederates are going to set up a very strong defense. The River Squadron is going to try 3 times to get past the fort, and they're going to fail, and they're going to have to be forced to pull back. So this first joint operation fails, and at this point, that's when Grant truly has the epiphany that they're going to have to try something else. This was ambitious, but maybe they have to try something even more ambitious, more daring, if they're going to capture Vicksburg. And Porter and Grant decide to work together again. This time, they're going to try something even more daring. I love this map because more close up allows you kind of see what I'm talking about. So Grant is going to decide that he's going to march his forces. He's going to leave Sherman behind as a diversion. Major General Hurlburt is in Memphis at the time, so he has 2 corps. Corps? 2 divisions, 2 corps. Down Louisiana, but they're on the wrong side of the river. How are you going to get from the wrong side of the river to across into Mississippi? Oh, the Navy, the Mississippi River Squadron is going to help. So he asked Porter to help him. And this is where it really gets daring. He needs Porter to run the guns at Vicksburg. He needs him to run the gauntlet of the guns at Vicksburg. There has been many, many times where they have tried to get past Vicksburg. They have tried to defeat the Confederate batteries at Vicksburg, and they have failed. A few ships, a few ironclads have gotten past, but not the entire squadron. And Porter goes, all right, let's do it. And he does. He successfully runs the guns at Vicksburg on 2 nights. On the 16th and the 22nd of April, he's going to run the gauntlet of the guns at Vicksburg. He's going to make it south of Vicksburg. He's going to pick up Grant's troops. They're going to initially plan to land at Grand Gulf. Grand Gulf is also fortified, has heavy batteries firing into the river. Apparently they said, hey, we can keep going, we can keep trying. And Porter's like, I would like at least to have an army to land. So maybe we should try something else. Grant says, all right, we'll go to Bruinsburg, which is about 10 miles south of Grand Gulf. It's an abandoned plantation. And against very little, no resistance, they are going to land 17,000 troops in one day. It is the largest amphibious invasion until 1942. Right? Guadalcanal in one day had 11,000 Marines. This is a bigger amphibious invasion than Guadalcanal. Right? And it only happens because of the relationship between Grant and Porter. And you might think that's the end of it. That's the end of the success story. No, because Porter doesn't just sail away, all right, take a break, lick his wounds. No, he is going to keep supporting Grant through the entire Vicksburg campaign. So while Grant is moving into central Mississippi, we're going to talk about Jackson here in a little bit, through these multiple battles, Porter is actually going to go back to Vicksburg and continuing firing on Vicksburg from the river. This is meant as a diversion, right? Keep the batteries firing on the river while Grant is doing his maneuvers inland. It's also wearing down the Confederate forces and the Confederate civilians because as Grant is moving inland, where do you think all of those Confederate civilians are going? To safety, right? To the garrison. So they are fleeing. Hundreds, thousands are fleeing to Vicksburg for safety. And when they get there, they are being fired upon day and night by Porter's guns. And this is where I want to talk about a little something, right? So not only are they doing diversions, but even when Grant settles into the siege, he's going to work very closely with Grant and his other commanders to provide support. This is not just blind firing into the city. Porter is actually going to visit the lines at Vicksburg several times to see if there's places along the Confederate defenses that he can weaken. Oftentimes he actually is going to stay a little bit farther back because Confederate batteries along the river are very strong and can and do destroy ironclads. But he will go forward if asked for assistance. And on May 27th, Sherman, William T. Sherman, Major General Sherman, is going to ask for assistance. He's going to see this part of the Vicksburg defenses that he thinks that the Navy can provide support for, enfilading fire. And he says, I don't think the guns are strong enough to actually pose any threat to the ironclads. Porter agrees, sails forward. Unfortunately, Sherman is wrong. And this is when the Cincinnati is going to be sunk. But he doesn't hold any grudges against Sherman. He understands, and he's going to continue to provide support throughout the entire siege. And you probably have seen this image before. And I want to add this because I think one of the other major turning points of the war is also what we see in Vicksburg proper. So joint operations, yes, huge turning point. We're going to talk about that is going to continue even into the Eastern Theater, and we cannot stress enough how important joint operations are going to be for the U.S. success in the Civil War. But there's also another, I think, a smaller turning point that happens, and this is mostly for the Vicksburg civilians. Like I said, Vicksburg is under continuous fire day and night. If they're not under fire from Porter's boats, ships, they are under fire from Grant's Army forces, right? They are hemmed in. Most people are actually going to have to resort to caves. This is a drawing that is going to appear in the newspaper at the time, but there's some images, even photographs of old veterans standing outside caves in Vicksburg. And this is because it is unsafe. It's not even safe to be in cellars. Some people will try to go into like the cellars, the root cellars of their homes, their basements. But then if a mortar hits, it actually go through the entire roof, through the floors, and the people are buried alive. People are also buried alive in caves when caves collapse because of direct hits. It does happen. And the reason I say that this is a turning point is because of that consistent firing, the lack of food. The social and racial hierarchy of Vicksburg is almost entirely eradicated. It doesn't matter if you are rich or poor, you are running away from those shells and those mortars. It doesn't matter if you are rich or poor, you are eating dog meat, cat meat, rat meat, mule meat. There is no food left. They do try initially to kind of maintain sort of class hierarchy, race hierarchy, but that quickly breaks down when there's no more food. It doesn't matter if you're black or white, you are running into those caves. There are people who would consider complete opposites from each other, all trying to survive. So I think that's a very small turning point, but I think it's worth mentioning. No one is safe. It doesn't matter if you're a combatant or not, you are under fire in Vicksburg. In joint operations, like I said, going back to joint operations, this is not going to end. And I think they learned their lesson. There is power and effectiveness in joint operations. And this is going to continue when Grant gets to the east. My mic go out? Sorry, just make sure I got my right spot and my mic still works. Then we're going to move to the east. I want to point out City Point. Has anyone been to City Point in Virginia? Yeah, highly recommend it if you ever have the chance. It is gorgeous. It sits above bluffs on the James River, near the confluence of the Appomattox and James Rivers. And Grant is going to put his headquarters there after some of the disastrous fighting as part of the overland campaign, such as the Wilderness. I'm going to keep just hammering on him for that. And also Cold Harbor. Grant is going to have to pull back, he's going to set up headquarters, and he's going to lay into Petersburg. He's going to try multiple assaults. After those multiple assaults fail, they're very bloody, they're very disastrous, he's going to settle in for a long siege. Sound familiar? So he's going to set up on these bluffs. And one reason they are so successful at City Point is not only access to the rail line that's there, but also to the river. And what's on the river? The U.S. Navy. So just for some numbers to show how successful that this is going to be. In one day, you're going to have 40 steamers at City Point, 75 sailing ships, and over 100 barges delivered to Grant's forces one day with the U.S. Navy. We're going to have Navy tugs. This is one of my favorite images. This is from the Naval Archives. But see all these artillery pieces? Constant resupply and reinforcement for Grant's forces at City Point. And the only way he's able to do that is through continued cooperation and a relationship with the Navy. This war is not going to be finished. The United States is not going to win if it's not for cooperation and understanding between the U.S. Army and the U.S. Navy. And I argue that starts during the Vicksburg campaign. It happened before. I'm not saying it didn't happen before, but not to the real degree that we're going to see the relationship between Grant and Porter. And Grant is going to recognize this, especially after the success at Vicksburg, right? He relied on the Navy at Fort Henry, Fort Donelson. The Navy also played a key role as part of Island 10. But Vicksburg is where he truly is going to look back when he's writing his memoir and say, this is the change. He's going to remark that the cooperation of the Navy was absolutely essential, even to the contemplation of such an enterprise. I had no more authority to command Porter than he had to command me. Again, this is a relationship. This is a collaboration. It's truly a joint operation. And that's why I think Vicksburg, other than it's a great strategic military victory, is another turning point as part of the Civil War. I think there's another element that we can also talk about. And this is hard war. Hard war speaks to, again, the purposeful targeting of private property, civilian property, materials, supplies, foodstuffs, buildings that support the Confederacy. And while we see somewhat small targeting material warfare before the Vicksburg campaign, this is a turning point in the mass implementation of hard war. And what Grant and his forces what they're going to learn at Vicksburg, they're going to continue to apply throughout the rest of the war because they see how successful it is. I already briefly talked about the effect on the civilians in Vicksburg, but I want to talk a little bit more about this inland campaign. Kind of like an overland campaign, but like a lowercase o, right? Overland to Mississippi. So from what I mentioned before, once Grant's troops land at Bruinsburg, they're going to start working their way up into the center of Mississippi. Johnston's forces, General Joseph Johnston and the Army of Tennessee, are operating in the area of Jackson. Grant is going to start pushing up in towards Jackson. There's going to be multiple small engagements on the way. They are going to subdue Grand Gulf eventually. They're going to have a battle of Raymond. And on the 14th of May, they're going to get into Jackson and they're going to start destroying Jackson. Again, Jackson is a hub. There are multiple rail lines in Jackson. At the time, Jackson is about a town of 2,000 people, 2,100 people. But there's rail lines, there's massive buildings all over the rail lines with Confederate foodstuff, materials, ammunitions, cotton, uniforms, name it. The whole line along the railroad area in Jackson is called Dixie Works. So Grant is going to realize he's going to have to destroy this. One reason, we don't want a major city and a major rail line in the rear. He has to turn towards Vicksburg. He doesn't want any threat of Johnston being easily able to get back into Jackson, getting on railroads, and meeting him in his rear. He doesn't want to take that chance. So he's going to order Sherman, his most trusted commander, to start destroying the rail line. But this is not where it ends. And I do have another quote for you because I think it really illustrates the shift to hard war at this time period. Grant is going to say, that Sherman's men are supposed to rip up all the line within 3 to 5 mile radius of the Confederate capital. He's also going to say they should destroy all CSA, Confederate States of America, cotton and stores they find. And this sounds like more traditional material warfare. But what I want to emphasize here is the word all and the repetition of the word all. What does this mean? So part of this can maybe be part of the 1862 Confiscation Act, the destruction of all property that supports the war effort. This allows Union soldiers to enter Confederate homes, Southern homes, abandoned homes, right, to take items from abandoned homes. And also, Grant doesn't mention any punishment for the individuals, for any soldiers who are going to take advantage of the destruction of Jackson, Mississippi. Another thing I want to mention is they order any buildings or items, anything that could be easily converted to hostile uses should also be destroyed. This is a very vague, open definition of what could possibly support the Confederacy. And this is going to open many opportunities. Union soldiers are going to take advantage of this order. They're going to go into private homes. They're going to steal jewelry. They're going to steal clothing, livestock, draft animals, kind of anything that they can use personally or for the military, they are going to destroy or take. One of my favorite stories, and people who have heard me speak before have heard this story, but one of my favorites is Grant is actually going to come up to a mill. And inside the mill, privately owned by a Mr. Green, there are women and girls making Confederate cloth. All the cloth has CSA printed on it. Grant comes in calmly, sees what they're doing, and says they've done enough work, sends the women home, and then orders the building to be burned. It's a private company. It's a private factory, but it supported the Confederacy. It's going to be destroyed. The other favorite story is there's apparently a hotel in Jackson, Mississippi at the time, originally before the war named U.S. Hotel. When the war happens, they're going to rename it the Confederate Hotel. And it gets burned during the sacking of Jackson. After the war, when Grant's president, the owner, is going to write Grant and say he wants to be recompensed for the burning of his building because he's always been a loyal individual to the Union. It was the U.S. Hotel, and Grant writes him back personally and says, no, last time I was there it was called the Confederate Hotel. All right? So this is that shift to that hard war strategy. Anything that supports the Confederacy, any people that support the Confederacy can be destroyed, can be affected, can be targeted. This is not wanton destruction. This is not just letting people run amok. This is really much targeted towards the war effort, but it is a shift because now it's not just war materials. It's anything that supports the war effort. I also think this plays into a role. People have heard of the Lieber Code, General Orders Number 100, that come out April of 1863. It's going to lay out ground rules for prisoners of war, guerrillas, but a key part of that is also people who support guerrillas, insurgents, and the Confederate war effort. I think this all ties together, making this, again, another turning point in the war effort. And it doesn't end with Jackson. It doesn't end with Vicksburg. I argue, again, they learned this lesson, right, going forward. This is not something they learned, used at Vicksburg, and abandoned. They're going to continuously using this going forward for the rest of the war. They're going to hit Jackson again in July of 1863. Sherman is going to start destroying it. He's going to work his way to the Meridian Campaign. Everyone knows about Sherman's March to the Sea. Heard of Sherman's neckties, where they would heat up the rails and then tie them so they wouldn't be easily untied to reform rail lines. So this is Jackson, March to the Sea, burning of Columbia, South Carolina. People have heard of Sheridan's burning of the Shenandoah Valley, right? and the Overland Campaign, the actual capital O, capital C Overland Campaign that we're also going to see. Hard war does not end. These are lessons that Grant and his commanders are going to learn, and they're going to continue to implement for the rest of the war. And that's why, again, I think that Vicksburg is the true turning point of the American Civil War. Thank you. And I know we are doing questions. We are live streaming, so if you guys have any questions, please come up to the microphones to ask your question. And I do want to point out the Department of Military History now has a website. So if you guys are interested, armyuniversity.edu. And then we also have podcasts. So if you want to hear us and talk about multiple topics, you can find us on anywhere you get your podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, Apple. Highly recommend it. You can hear from historians all the time. Go over here first, and then.
Yes, I have been to City Point. It's a beautiful place. Not many buildings there. They do have Grant's little home, and his wife was with them. But to imagine all those ships and all those docks, pretty amazing. I've been to Vicksburg a long time ago. I'd like to go back. But one thing, it's sort of a question, but you talk about the logistics. I mean, having taught history at the high school level and being a Civil War freak, I admit it. Anyway, one of the things you would teach, they had more rail, they had more people, they had more industry. So naturally, they had the advantage. But man, if you couldn't move all that stuff, like you could have 50 cannons up in Pittsburgh, but there's no use there. And so between the use of the rivers and the railroads, which they were really big in the Civil War for the first time, can you talk a little bit about just moving all this stuff to the proper place?
No, you're exactly right. The innovative use of the river and the rail lines. This is not something that they take for granted.
Right.
And I think Grant realizes that it's going to be a true success if he can leverage the rail lines and the river. And again, the Navy. And also, even at the time, the Navy would have what we think of today as contractors, where they would invite volunteer private companies, private businesses, private ships to also support the logistics effort, because they have so many supplies, right? We have people coming from Philadelphia, from Baltimore. I grew up actually about an hour and a half from Gettysburg in East Central Pennsylvania, and Schuylkill County Ammunition and Armor Works. You can see those you go to Fort McHenry, you can see it at Vicksburg. How do you get from Schuylkill County, Philadelphia, all the way down to Vicksburg? And you can't do that without rail lines. But you also need people to realize that you need people to run the rail lines. You need experts. You need professionals to understand it. So they're going to give people who are experts in railroads, experts in factories, they're going to give them commissions in the U.S. military to leverage that expertise to help the war effort. And I think Grant truly realized that.
Like Sherman said, though, this first example is war is hell, you cannot refine it. A lot of people miss that second part, but, and of course he went on to, I've been to the South where people go during the war of northern aggression, and go on, because they haven't forgotten. And I guess, didn't Vicksburg not celebrate the 4th of July for like 100 years or something? Yeah.
Yep, 100 years till the
Not
1960s.
a day for fireworks. Thank you.
And before we get to the next question, the one thing I want to bring up is speaking about logistics, which I didn't mention for the sake of time. Another reason we see this maybe as part of hard war, the shift to the hard war strategy, is Grant is going to cut loose from his supply lines once he lands at Bruinsburg. He realizes that speed is key to his success. He doesn't want to allow the Confederates the time to reinforce, to resupply, get in position. So he's going to consider, he has to get going, right? He has to get his corps on the road. So he is going to say, we're going to have a couple days rations, 3 days rations, and we're going to live off the land. We're going to cut loose from our supply line. We're going to live off the land. It's not a complete cutting. There are some things, Mississippi soil might be rich, but there's some things you can't actually get from the soil, right? You can't get medical supplies, you can't get ammunition, you can't get artillery, but those are on wagons and they're coming up behind the troops. But he needs to get his troops up. And the conscious decision to cut that line, I think also it makes it a turning point as part of this campaign. Because we're also going to see this later as part of various other campaigns where he makes the conscious decision to just go. Right? Seize the opportunity.
Yes, ma'am. I would talk a little bit about Pemberton, the commander of the Confederate forces. It seems that even though he had no choice, he had to surrender. A lot of people, because he was from Pennsylvania, your state, home state, they didn't much care for him. And he paid a pretty good price because one, he surrendered, and two, he's from Pennsylvania. Could you talk a little bit about how he was kind of mistreated by the Confederacy because they just didn't, because he was a non-Southerner, they really just didn't trust him?
I don't think they didn't trust him. They did have faith into him up at a certain point. So he is going to marry a woman from Virginia, and that's why he chooses to join the Confederate forces. And he considers himself a Southerner. He is from Pennsylvania, but he really considers himself a Southerner. And he is successful early on in the war. But I don't know if you ever heard of Peter Principle, the idea that people are promoted beyond
Beyond your competence.
behind their competence. I think that's what happens really to Pemberton. He is successful at administrative tasks, smaller level planning and execution, but once he gets to lieutenant general, once he's in command of the Department of Mississippi and East Louisiana, which was initially General Van Dorn, Earl Van Dorn's command after he gets relieved, he's out of his element. And he also doesn't really have a personality for taking risks and seizing opportunities. Between him and Joe Johnston, and again, I've talked about this before about Joe Johnston, they're like, well, who else could have done it? There's not many people really available at this time, but Joe Johnston is really not the guy for the job, right? He also is slow, he's meticulous, he really doesn't take a lot of risks. So between him and Pemberton, I don't really think they had much of a chance. One thing that one historian, I believe it's Michael Ballard, is talking about is one of the issues Pemberton gets a lot of flack, let's say, is he has stored food and supplies in Vicksburg. So while there are certain soldiers eating mule meat and suffering, he has actually stored sugar. He has stored like salt pork, corn flour, because he's always thinking that they could possibly break out. Joe Johnston will come, they will relieve, and possibly they can break out maybe to the south, to Warrenton, and he needs supplies to be able to have that assault to support that. And so when he surrenders, 29,000 individuals he's going to surrender. And then they find out they were eating mule meat when there were supplies, and that maybe they could have held out a few more days. That's just going to create this narrative that really he wasn't very supportive of the Confederacy. He's a quitter. He's not the man for the job, and that's going to create this vicious reputation for
I
John
think
C.
what you're
Pemberton.
saying is just because you can captain a ship doesn't mean you can command a fleet.
Exactly. Right?
Anyway.
You got it. And then again, I'm harsh on John C. Pemberton too, for sure. But he's really not the man for the job.
Thank you. I hope this is a question in the journal, but you were talking about learned lessons. Mm-hmm. Why didn't Halleck learn any lessons?
That's a good one. I'm not an expert on Halleck. I will admit that. Old brains, if you will. I also, but one thing, if you want to think about personalities, I think Halleck knows he's smart, thinks he's smart, and thinks he knows better, and he doesn't like to be, I don't want to say threatened, but he doesn't like to be challenged. And Grant is going to challenge him. Grant is going to consistently try different things and prove his worth, and I don't think Halleck likes being challenged. He doesn't like being second best. He thinks he is the best thing going. And when that's not true, I think he doesn't do very well. So that's what I got from my very cursory reading about Halleck. I'm not an expert on Halleck, for sure. Go over here.
Thank you for coming and talking today. And I want to morph into D-Day. And so many, America's had so few military victories over the years, and I was wondering what you can say about that.
No, that's a big question. Thank you. Yes, today is the anniversary of the D-Day invasion. The D-Day landing, thinking about the largest amphibious invasion, right? Thank you so much. I don't want to go too off topic, but I know that's something on everyone's mind, especially considering the last couple of years with Iraq and Afghanistan, what kind of happened. And again, the U.S. military is very good at tactical victories, and I would argue very good at operational victories. We do see a bit of a breakdown, though, between the tactical, operational, and strategic level, and why tactical successes don't necessarily translate to strategic success. And in the Civil War, I think we see tactical and operational success is because, again, those relationships between Abraham Lincoln, between the chiefs of staff, and through the commanders, and talking and developing plans and strategy to achieve the objective. One of my favorite, and I almost put it up here, but I didn't, it's a meme. It's from a painting at the time when it's talking about success and planning for success, and it has Porter, Lincoln, Sherman, and Grant all sitting around a table talking about the end of the war and how they're really going to achieve victory against the Confederacy. And they're all sitting at the table, and everyone has a voice, and the Navy's there, the Army's there, and they're all working together with the commander-in-chief to develop a strategy. And I think that's what makes the United States during the Civil War so successful, and I don't really know if we see that as much in recent years, but that's, I think, again, a little off topic. But no, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. You did a nice job, I think, explaining the importance of the rail lines and the supply of Vicksburg to the war effort. And I've read, it's been years, but I've read about how also there was another factor involved, that Lincoln was under a lot of political pressure because the Mississippi was our main, very important trade route. And so all those farmers north of the Ohio and in the north are not able to get their corn and whatnot down the Mississippi. Could you, and that was another factor, we got to get the Mississippi open.
Control the Mississippi.
Could you expand on that some?
Yeah, no, I think, don't have the full map. I guess I can go back to the Great Snake, right? Mississippi, the Mississippi River is massive. We know that. But I think sometimes we get kind of pigeonholed and we put blinders on and we just look at the Mississippi River outside of Vicksburg and we realize you're exactly right. It goes all the way from the northern United States all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. And it is a main lifeline. It's not only the key to Vicksburg, but when Lincoln is eventually going to hear that Vicksburg surrenders, he's going to say the father of the waters flows unvexed. They finally have control of the father of the waters, which is the Mississippi River. This is going to give them access along for Ohio, Cairo, Illinois, Arkansas. Every single place where you can get supplies in, reinforcements in is key once they have the Mississippi River, complete control of the Mississippi River. Because they're going to take New Orleans in 1862. Farragut's going to take New Orleans in 1862. Farragut's going to try to get Vicksburg and he's turned back. Vicksburg is a singular holdout, and then Port Hudson, also in Louisiana, which surrenders on 9 July 1863, 5 days after Vicksburg surrenders. Those are the holdouts. So you have almost all the Mississippi River, and then it stops. So all those supplies, all those reinforcements, all that food can really not get through. So once that's opened, it's a huge win for the United States. It's a huge win for not just the United States Army, the United States military force, but I think actually just what I said, the United States. No, great question. I actually double-checked to make sure how big the Mississippi River was for a second, because I was like, it's massive. I remember like going back to like middle school geography. We cannot, I think, discount how important the Mississippi River is to the United States and to the Confederacy.
This whole thing of destroying military supplies, and the importance of the march to the sea. I don't remember, I read it somewhere that if you could make an area 50 miles across, in this area of horse-drawn you couldn't move an army. So without the rail, with a swath of barren land, there was no such thing as conducting a war. And so that's really, I think in our modern era, we just think, well, you get in a car and you go, but 50 miles was the limit. Horses just couldn't haul stuff to support even themselves, much less artillery and all the things that are involved in an army move.
No, you're exactly right. And I think that sometimes when we think about even maybe, yeah, Civil War and definitely farther back, we take for granted how large these armies were, how much food they required, artillery, wood for fires, all the gear that they have with them. So it's rail lines or wagons or barges. Also, the armies themselves take up a lot of space. So we're talking about 17,000 people crossing a river in one day. Where do 17,000 people go? My hometown is less than 15,000. So we have an entire town arriving in Mississippi. You're going to have to feed them. You have to get places for them to tent. And they're also moving across mass distances. And how do you do that? Rail line is key. The river is key. And wagons and horses and mules. Takes a lot of space, takes a lot of time. And also thinking of what I thought you were going to say is the march to the sea is the idea when Sherman, his armies are going to spread out and they're going to create a huge swath that they're just going to cover. And it's like locusts, right, where they're just going to start picking Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina dry because they just spread out from the roads and the rail line and just take everything that can possibly screw with the Confederacy.
I'm going to jump in here real quick with one online question, and then we'll come over here, and then we'll finish up with the last online question. Somebody watching at home wants to know, I recently read Ron Charnell's biography of U.S. Grant. He spent a lot of time talking about the Vicksburg campaign. Did that book introduce any new insights or findings in this area of research?
I didn't catch the first.
Ron Charnell's biography of Grant.
The big.
Yes.
Yes. It's a bookstop, a doorstop. I don't think it introduces anything new, but I think it really opens up this part of history to the public. Like it's a big book, but it's one of those books that you could read maybe a chapter before bed or leisurely. And I think that's the value of more histories like that, is that it gets more people reading. Not everyone is going to pick up Harry Laver's book. Not everyone's going to pick up maybe Joan Waugh's book. Not everyone's going to pick up Michael Ballard's book. These are great books, but not everyone's going to pick them up. The Ron Chernow, that's getting a lot of attention. It's getting a lot of publicity, and I think there's a huge power and influence in people learning this very important history, especially about our own history. And I'm a huge fan of Grant, so anything people get reading about Grant, I recommend. But it's definitely, there's also, if you guys don't want to read the huge doorstop paperweight, there's also an audiobook. And the audiobook is really nice to listen to while you're driving or working out or cleaning the house. And then you don't actually have to but fantastic.
Going back to the Vicksburg and then down below in New Orleans, what sort of communication went on in terms of planning the initial attack when they first started to attack New Orleans and realized they couldn't get up river? And then how did they coordinate their communication to understand that, okay, well, we're going to have to come down from the north and then attack that way? And what was their how do they coordinate their communication and plan of attack in order to capture that area?
No, that's a great question. So it happens pretty quickly. So Farragut is going to try to approach, I believe, he's going to try multiple times in the fall of 1862, and Grant is going to start his more inland campaigns and the multiple approaches to Vicksburg in December of 1862. So it's a pretty quick turnaround. And this is happening as part of just the Department of the West, right? The larger strategy for the war, the larger strategy for the Western theater, working through to realize they're going to have to subdue Vicksburg. And Grant, as commander of the Army of the Tennessee, is the major army in the region and working how they're going to approach Vicksburg. And like I said, he's going to try multiple ways once they realize that the Navy is unsuccessful in approaching from the river. They keep trying. I'm not saying they just give up. They keep trying. But he's realizing they're going to have to try something different. And he does more traditional ways the first time. It's like, okay, maybe they can't get it from the river, but I can approach it from inland, go down the railroad. We're going to have a diversion with Sherman in this area. We can join up forces. It makes sense. These are things that he's done multiple times before throughout the Western Theater. But because of various obstacles, various events, we're going to have the raid on Holly Springs by Nathan Bedford Forrest and Earl Van Dorn, which is going to cut off the northern approach. Disaster at Chickasaw Bayou. That's when they're going to realize they're going to have to try something more innovative. But there's a lot of communication, especially with Lincoln, with Halleck, and various commanders to try to develop a plan to take Vicksburg. They know they have to take Vicksburg. Thank you.
We'll finish up with this one here. On the topic of hard war, somebody wants to know if there were instances where maybe the U.S. did offer compensation because they decided that some theft or destruction was unjustified.
You have a few, I don't know any during the Vicksburg campaign, but especially in the Meridian campaign and moving farther into Alabama and Georgia, there's a few instances where it involves personal property, especially women and children, that are going to cause some issues that are going to come to light later. I don't know why I'm answering him. It's like he answered the question. I'll face here. Sorry. That they are going to write after the war petitioning for compensation. I know that Sherman, we know he's a bit fiery. He is going to hold out to the last, saying that like he did what he had to do. War is hell. That he doesn't believe that they should be compensated if they were supporting the war effort, that he did what he was supposed to do in that effort. I think there is one instance where a private home was attacked or like destroyed and they were able to get recompense, and that was Jackson or Meridian, but that's all I can think of right now. But that's a great question. But I know like to the end, Sherman's like, nope, I did what I did. He actually is going to send several women and girls actually as prisoners of war up into Tennessee and eventually up to St. Louis, Missouri, because they were supporting the Confederacy in northern Georgia. So he has no regrets when it comes to destroying the Confederacy.
Thank you, Dr. Riotto. This was fantastic. I know you're relocating. I hope you'll come back and see us again.